Hello and welcome back. It's the Rhetoric Reviewed podcast back at it, and today we're going to be discussing whether or not objective morality exists and why I don't think it matters whether it does or doesn't because of its utility. So we're going to jump right in. We're going to do a quick introduction, talk about contemporary views on it, traditional views, the current conflict, and then what I think is the truth behind this. So I'm going to preface this by saying that this is coming from probably a conservative mindset. I do believe that objective morality is false and that you do need a certain belief system to have morality, but we're going to be talking about why this may or may not be true and why it may or may not matter. So what is morality? Morality is put simply, it's a little bit of an intangible thing, but it's that which is good, that which is useful, that which is valuable. And those last two definitions I kind of throw in there as, they're not wrong definitions, but it's what I believe in. This is my video, right? So so that which is good, that which is, moral, that is what morality is. Using the word in and of itself is kind of weird right now. Anyways, so that's what morality is. So this is what dictates whether or not stuff like murder is good, whether or not polygamy is good, all of these different standards in society, and what we hold as, valuable and good and pure, that is derived from a belief system, which, belief systems have certain values which can dictate morality, right? This would be, for example, in modernity, we have a very strong emphasis on individual rights and liberty, and this leads to our morality mainly being, based upon stuff like consent, want, all these different things that are the current values and the moral indicators in today's modern society, right? So that's the contemporary current view. So let's move on to the traditional, right? This is going to be the quick part, and then the metaphor and stuff will come in later. But the traditional view emphasizes more long-term time prioritization, which means that you're going to have some things that limit individual freedom in exchange for collective good over multiple generations, right? The one thing you have to really think about traditional stuff is, especially when it comes to stuff like Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, stuff that's been around for hundreds, hundreds of generations, is that the time preferences in these in these civilizations and in these belief structures is very low, which means that they're able to create and preach practices that allow for the longevity of the society itself and not just goodness in one's life. For example, something with like a medium time preference would be like investing right now to get more money later. That would be a medium time preference because maybe that'll last you like one or two generations, so depending if you have kids, 401k, all that nice stuff in today's world. Whereas like a low time preference means that you don't really have any rush, and that the stuff you decide and the stuff that you limit people on today are the very things that will benefit and keep society running for centuries on end. And that's one of the things you have to really consider when it comes to, Christian civilization, Hindu, and Buddha, all these different more major world civilizations, even Confucian, right? Is that these have been around for a while. And if you've been in this channel for a long time, you would know I'm a social Darwinist, right? Not like the evil racist kind, but a type that believes that societies who have survived today have done certain things correctly, and it's wrong to pervert those things because they have, the societies that didn't implement these certain ideas haven't survived till now because of Darwinistic competition between nations, as it is, right? Or nations, but also like broader societal groups, right? Like, for example, like obviously the Christianity is not a nation, but the broader Christendom is a concept that exists. Okay, so as we were going with that, traditional, time preferences, it highly restricts individual freedom, liberty, autonomy, whatever word you want to use, in place for more valuable things in the long term, which could be things like, stabilized birth rates, better wages, more social cohesion, more trust, less crime. These are all things that societies need to keep in check, such that people can feel safe and feel the duty and will to reproduce, because that is what eventually could lead a boom or bust for civilization, right? If you don't have enough people, right, you're going to get out competed by any neighboring civilization, and therefore you will lose any sovereignty that may have existed before. I guess before like the concept of sovereignty existed. So that's the contemporary and traditional views on morality, right? This is the main difference isn't whether or not on like specifics like, abortion or like, women's rights, right? These are all different things that are specific, but the bigger one is, I believe, it is on time preferences, which is a term, again, I'm going to be probably using a lot this video, but it basically means that the preference you have for things happening quickly. So a low time preference means that you are not prioritizing things quickly, whereas a high time preference means that you are looking for short-term gains. And both of them have their place, right? So it just comes to certain ideas require low or high time preferences. And stuff like high time preference might be stuff like war, right? If there's an imminent threat, you need to kind of sabotage your own economy to make sure you can mobilize your own people to fight a war so you don't get completely obliterated. That's a very good example of shutting down certain things and prioritizing the survival of the nation in the short term and leaving the rest of it up to chance, right? You gotta win the war first to even keep your nation. And high time preference might be stuff like having certain social values that leads to better communities, which leads to more birth rates, right? I mean, I really like talking about birth rates on this channel, but it is one of the main drivers of civilization, especially in the past. And we need to constantly compare ourselves to the past because that is what we are from, and therefore we inherit all of the properties of the past. Because otherwise, if they didn't work, they wouldn't be around right now, right? Or we wouldn't have inherited a lot of these ideas. Anyway, so a lot of the conversation that's going around nowadays when it comes to morality is that objective morality doesn't exist. With the growing atheist population in not only the America, but the Western world, and the whole world at large right now, but with all that happening, it's easy to see why. When you go against a religion, right, it's like very few times you might find people like, oh, I completely agree with all of this, and I'm going to live out the words of a religion and stuff. You don't really need to, because we've inherited, like, for example, in America, a Judeo-Christian view and of the world and morality, which has been embedded into our law code to a certain degree, and is all just in our collective conscience. What a lot of people don't understand is that they don't believe things. You don't like just think things are right. You think things are right because that's what you've been raised around, and that's what you have learned subliminally somehow as a child. So there is no objective morality, or just what feels right. It feels right because we've been conditioned to feel that way, which is one of the benefits of coming from a legacy of a society. A society with a legacy in a previous one, because we already have all these values, and therefore we don't need to create and innovate our own. Similar to how maybe it's more specific in America, but there's very little philosophical innovation going on in America when it comes to stuff like morality and belief systems as it pertains to like traditional religion, which has been the driver of America and all of societies in the past. So as we move into this new era of greater secularization, there's more questions on whether or not you actually need a god or a religious belief system to be moral, right? So one of the big problems, again, as we've said earlier, is what does it mean to be moral? What is good? What is bad? And when you try to ascribe certain, universalities to this, you're going to find some problems, contradictions that are inherent in almost all things moral, because that's kind of the nature of human behavior. However, if you have a structure, a belief system, which dictates with a higher power that is not human, that is infallible, right? Infallible, without fault, then you have a more standardized way to get the masses of people to agree with what you're saying. And that is often done through both a social pressure situation, because if everyone else is believing in this god and doing this, I'm going to obviously not only be raised in that situation or system, I will be more inclined to do so as to not feel ostracized, right? And that's one of the greatest parts of religion, I think, is the whole community element, because whether or not it's like forced on people or not, the fact is it creates community, and that is necessary for better social cohesion. That is simply how it has been, and for a community to exist, you need a singular goal or connecting point, and religion is a great way to tie hundreds, thousands, millions of billions of people even under one umbrella. So moving on is the whole idea of the fear makes it bad, right? Again, we live in a society where everyone is brought up to a certain degree to be individualistic. We value autonomy, liberty, all these things over these collective good. And that has its own benefits. We've had very, very good success when it comes to like innovation and stuff. However, there might be social consequences in the future, and let's get into that for a little bit. So people always say like, oh, if you need fear or if you need to be threatened with hell or heaven to be a moral person, then you're not actually moral. And that's an interesting view, because definitely a lot of people, definitely in the past, we've seen examples of people trying to become religious or moral to try to get themselves forgiven for their sins in the Christian tradition at the very least. And I could see how that turns a lot of people off. That's one of the things that pushed me away from it initially as well. But the thing we're failing to understand is that there is no such as a perfect person, right? We are not blank slates. We are all flawed individuals, and there is, I don't think there's a single religion or belief structure anywhere that believes we are perfect, right? We are all, let's start with that foundation. We are all flawed individuals, and no one is truly moral. By nature, we are selfish in that we try to do things that are good for us, even if it means helping other people to make ourselves feel better or feel needed. We all, as humans, as mammals, as as creatures, right? We have certain needs that we want to fulfill, and those needs have to be self-serving, or else our species would not have survived until now. Which is why, even if you have like really generous people, the people who love volunteering, all these stuff, it's great for society, but are they really doing it out of the goodness of their heart, or do they feel some sort of internal value out of it, right? And that's not even me being cynical, or like myself being unable to understand that feeling, right? It's because it doesn't. I know evolutionary psychology is a little bit weird, but there's no reason for that to be the case. Because if you don't serve yourself, you're gonna die. And maybe that's changed with how, like, we're reaching post-scarcity, possibly, depending on where you live in the world. That's a whole different video. Anyways, I also just noticed that I wrote is instead of are in the title. Yeah, well, that's kind of awkward. Where are we going? Okay, so yeah, there's all that talk about, like, if you need, like, an invisible sky daddy to tell you what you need to do, what you have to do, what you can't do, what you must not do. Why do I keep saying the same things again in dues? I don't know. But if you need that, then you must not be moral. So let me present to you my magnum opus on this issue, my metaphor, right? Which is, I implore you to, perhaps answer any questions, but 10 p.m., let's say you're in upstate New York, which if you don't know is very rural, right? I don't know why I'm doing this like I'm Trump or something. Let's say you're in upstate New York, very rural area, 10 p.m. at night, open roads, plenty of lights, no danger, right? Not even animals. There's no deer crossing, right? And 30 miles per hour, it's a dirt road, empty, wide lanes. Are you speeding 5 or 10 above? Alternatively, 4 p.m., afternoon, you're coming back from work early. 25 miles per hour. Are you going 5 over? No cops. The truth is, almost all of you probably answered yes. And that's because it's natural. No one wants to go at the speed limit, right? Who wants to go at the speed limit? It's often burdensome. There's no one there. The road's wide. You have the space to speed of, like 2, 3, 4, 5 miles per hour above, right? And that's completely normal. I do that. You do that. Everyone's done that. Cops do that, right? And then I add the second question. Would you do that very same thing if a cop was there with radar following you the entire way? And the answer is no. The answer is no, because there's a threat of consequence, right? And this is where we get into whether or not it's useful or true, and why the truth of it doesn't actually matter. Because whether or not you actually don't want to speed, and out of the goodness of your heart, you would love to obey the law, and on that 10 p.m. night with lights shining, wide roads, no cops, if you would go 30 miles per hour on that road out of your own volition, that doesn't matter. Because with a cop, the 1% of people who are truly good, or I don't know, like law abiding, right, to the dot, those people are equal in social good to the people who would rather go 10, 15 miles above, but instead have a limiting factor. And that's why objective morality is false, but it's still useful. I wrote this entire slideshow wrong, and it's pissing me off now, but let's go with true. Okay, objective morality is true, right? The arguments on objective morality is true. Because from a secular and a religious standpoint, especially where the world has come, in which, it's not a majority Christian world, Buddhist world, Hindu world, in the Western nations, you aren't the majority. And the tide is overwhelmingly turned against, objective morality as it is ordained by a God. But people are forgetting that just because objective morality exists or doesn't exist doesn't mean it's not useful to have a certain belief system. And when we try to get rid of a belief system without understanding what it accomplished, rather than just seeing it as an oppressive force and trying to find some new solutions for it, you're going to get a very obvious social breakdown because, again, as a social Darwinist, I believe that Christianity survived only this long because it has certain functions within it, which I do not fully understand. Well, some of them I do, but some of which I do not fully understand, that which sustained populations that followed Christianity. For example, if Christianity did not say to, like, not murder or something, what realistically would stop people from murdering? And then you would just have low trust, all that stuff breaking down. Obviously, that's an extreme example, but there's like very specific stuff, especially when it comes to limiting stuff like sexual preferences and stuff, and and options you could take in life. There are consequences to that when you get rid of them without understanding what those certain doctrine were created for. And this is where the whole truth comes in. And the truth is that we need to understand why we did things in the past and not just see them in the views of our current modern lens of like, oh, autonomy, liberation. Because in our view for a high time preference, short-term view of morality, where we think, oh my god, we can't limit, like, I don't know, like polyamory or something, because then like people consent is like the number one morality and people can do whatever they want. We're ignoring that. Give it 2, 3, 4 generations, 92% of polygamous marriages fail. Then you have more people without parents. You have less kids because people don't want to get into relationships anymore, right? And even though there's a very small fringe of society that does this, even stuff like allowing like divorce to happen at such a large rate, right? All of these things are consequences that build up and up and up across generations, right? And we don't understand that, which is why we need to not have this whole like short-term time preference, and we need to try to really consider, why do we need to have a belief structure, and what did it do in the past for us? Because when we understand what a belief structure did for us in the past, then we can understand what we are not doing right now, which is a necessary, function of human civilization or societies, interchangeable, right? And then we can finally start to have a discussion on whether or not we need a belief structure and whether or not objective morality is true or not. Because ultimately, I don't think objective morality exists, because I do believe that there is a universal set of morality, which is set by a belief system, but not some sort of cosmic good. And I would love to believe that, and I would love everyone to believe that. However, once the majority of the population is not religious or does not ascribe to a certain belief structure, it falls apart. Because once you claim a word from an authority that the other person doesn't follow, that claim has no value. And just gathering my thoughts here real quick before we end. Yeah. Basically, because our society is no longer overwhelmingly majority religious, you can't claim to that as a standard anymore. And therefore, it's very hard to actually dictate morality, because the people would rather do as they please, as the modern institutions have convinced them to do so. The only conclusion I can see from this is sort of the end times and social breakdown, which we've already been seeing over the last 5, 6, 7, 10 years, right? And even further, if you want to start in like the 1960s, right? I could even go back as far as the 50s. And there's all these different things that we do now that we see as moral, but we have no historical basis. And we're already seeing some of the consequences, and the possible consequences in the future are even more evident. With less families, more social breakdown, who knows what's going to happen to society? We must keep waiting, we must keep guarding ourselves from evil, and hopefully things can get better. So, thank you for watching. If you want to leave a like, leave a comment, possibly. I would love to get back to you on that. I love responding to comments. So, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Rhetoric Reviewed, out.